Hello, I'm Major Nigel Bovey of the Christian Evidence Society, and welcome to Questions of Our Times. Today's question is: how endangered is democracy? With 31 years continuous service, my guest today is one of the UK's longest serving MPs. Since being elected for Plymouth Sutton in 1992, he has seen 8 Prime Ministers and has served under 6. A lawyer by training, he has been a minister in the Lord Chancellor's office and the Shadow Secretary of State for International Development. Throughout his parliamentary career, my guest has promoted the role of Christians in Parliament and is the chair of the all-party parliamentary group of that name. Devon's longest-serving MP, in 2022 he announced that he would not be standing in the next general election. A Conservative MP for South West Devon since 1997 and knighted in 2019 in recognition of his public service. Here to talk with me today is Sir Gary Streeter. Sir Gary, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nigel. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Let's start right back in the beginning then. How and why did you get involved in politics?
Yes, thanks. Mine's quite an unusual story because I got to the age of 30 years of age without being remotely interested in politics and indeed not knowing anything about it. And I was involved in a charismatic house church in those days, and I perhaps looking back would describe myself as being a cabbage for Jesus. In those days it was all about our meetings, looking after one another, prayer meetings and so on. We knew nothing about what was going on in our community or what was going on in our country or in our world, and that was wrong. Frankly, there was many good things about it, but that was wrong. So I knew nothing about it. But during 1985, year before you were born, Nigel, God started to sort of shake me up. Every time I would open the Bible, he would talk to me about, or I'd see the words law and justice sort of leaping out at me. And I got quite unsettled. I was a partner in a big law firm, but I just had a sense of God's calling. And that was great. And but towards the end of the year, I was saying, Lord, I don't care what it is, I'll do it. Just please tell me what it is. The elders of the church agreed, yes, he's got a calling on my life, but they didn't know what it was for. And in the end, my wife, like many husbands listening in tonight, I am a man under authority. My wife said to me, go away and don't come back until you hear from God as to what it is you should be doing with your life. And so I went away the day of prayer and fasting, cutting a long story short, came back 6 o'clock that night, and Jan said to me, did you hear anything? I said, yes, I think God is calling us into politics. And she went, oh no. And she was right. We knew nothing about it. I was 30. I knew that Mrs. Thatcher was the Prime Minister. That's all I knew. David Owen was a big local figure as a Plymouth Member of Parliament. That's all I knew. But so the next Monday, I said to the partners in the law firm, we used to meet every Monday for coffee and donuts at 11 o'clock. And I said to them, I'm getting involved in politics, but I don't know which party to join. And that's how I started. Yeah. It was a long journey began. And 5 or 6 years later, I end up being elected to Parliament, but it was very much inspired by this sense of a call.
By a calling, and you the 2 key words there. You're challenged by the concepts of law and justice.
Yeah.
There's a scripture which you will be well familiar with, which says that righteousness exalts a nation. Do you see much righteousness in British politics at the minute? And if not, how, what political process can bring about righteousness within a nation?
I mean, it depends how we define the word righteousness. I understand it to mean right with God.
Yeah.
As opposed to sort of the moralistic, sticking to the rule book. Aren't I great? I look down on everyone else but I'm sticking to the law, and so on, which we don't really want too much of that, do we? But being right with God is obviously important. And here I think, of course, we live at a time when about 5 or 6% of our population attend church regularly. Perhaps it's not unfair to say that some of those are simply going through the motions because they've always done it. But let's say that there are 6 or 7% of our population who believe in Christianity profoundly and passionately, are seeking to follow Jesus in their lives, and therefore are right with God. We can rightly ask ourselves the question, I think, can that small tail ever wag the dog? So I think that's our problem. But we've been here before. If you go back to the 18th century, when our country was in a bit of a mess, let's be honest about it, the Wesleyan revival led to a real upsurge in sort of, it led to Victorian Britain in a way, which was far from perfect, but there were lots of things were being put right, and looking out for the poor and vulnerable and children and all the rest of it, but also a better condition in our politics. So I would say to any of your listeners who are saying, well, all you lot up there at Westminster, you're all rubbish, I think I would say, my friend, perhaps it starts with you. It starts with me. Are we doing everything we can be doing to ensure that the Christian voice is heard in our nation, and that more and more people are seeking to follow Christ, and therefore the conversation about what kind of laws we want, what kind of leadership we want, would take on a different colour.
Yeah, we won't itemise the rubbish because tonight I don't want this conversation to be about politicians or personalities, and I'd like us just to talk about the principles, because I'm sure we all have strong views about certain personalities. This is not the arena for that, as tempting as it may be. So you're right, aren't you, when you say there's only a small handful. It's kind of the salt in the salt and light, and if you take that 6% and then of the country that says they are Christian by conviction, you take it into 650 MPs. How many MPs can you identify or self-identify as a Christian?
Yeah, well, I put more than 6%, that's for sure. So well over the 10% mark of 65. So as you rightly said in your introduction, I've been sort of heading up Christians in Parliament for quite a long time now, well over a decade. And we've seen God move, we've seen the work flourishing. We've been blessed with some substantial finance. We employ 3 people to run the APPG and oversee Bible studies, fellowship groups, interesting speakers coming in. The whole idea is to equip and encourage Christians, but we would probably see between 70 and 90 colleagues who have some kind of Christian faith and come to one thing or another. And our National Prayer Breakfast last year, because we run this annual National Prayer Breakfast, which one, two of you, again, of your viewers will have seen either in person, been to it, or seen it live stream it. I think that's the modern expression. I think 140 members of Parliament came this year, so it is more than that national average. And I'll tell you something else too. Look, running a country is difficult. All Western countries are going through a tough patch at the moment. COVID and lockdown knocked us all for 6. Every system's under pressure. The vast majority of people here at Westminster, of the 650, the vast majority are good and decent people, whether or not they're men and women of faith. They're doing their best. They're well motivated to try and make this country better. But actually the product of running a country, running a government under the tremendous challenge of 2023, and there's no money. We spent £400 billion on responding to COVID, all of it borrowed. It's a challenge, but we're doing our best.
I'll come back to the parliamentary group in a moment on a slightly different tack, if I may, and I'm just making myself a note to do so. We're talking about democracy and to what extent is it endangered. Let's sort of define, if you like, some terms. What for you are the defining marks of a democracy?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because for about 5 years, about 10 or 12 years ago, but for 4 or 5 years, I headed up something which most of your viewers won't have come across, Westminster Foundation for Democracy. This is something that we do from this country. It's funded by the taxpayer. It comes out of the British Parliament, and we share our expertise, if you like, with emerging democracies in Eastern Europe 20, 30 years ago, in Central Asia now, in North Africa, that sort of up and down, and Middle East and so on. And so I spent 5 years doing a lot of traveling, a lot of talking about democracy. And I guess really it comes down to 4 or 5 key component features. One is obviously free and fair elections. Secondly, having the people having the guts to stand up, put their head above the parapet and stand for election, because most people who stand, don't win. And you've got to have people. I remember being in a conference in Istanbul. I'm going off piece here, Nigel, forgive me. And I was talking at a seminar about democracy, and I said to all the people present, it was NGO and civil servant types, wouldn't it be great if we could have a democracy without politicians? And they're all nodding away, nodding away. Yeah, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Hang on a minute, guys. It's simply not possible. You have to have people prepared to be elected to office and elected out of office. Otherwise, it's not democracy. It's a whatever it is. It's a dictatorship, probably. So free and fair elections, people with the guts to stand, a free press, absolutely critical, an independent judiciary, absolutely critical, which gives you all the rule of law, which is, something we shouldn't take for granted in this country. We live under a system where we have the rule of law. So sometimes government makes decisions and the courts, the Supreme Court says, no, you're not going to do that. That's against the law. Well, isn't it great that we have the checks and balances? I think our democracy, it's far from perfect, but having been all around the world talking about it, it's as good as anywhere else in the world, because we have in place the checks and balances that keep it robust and keep it secure.
Gary, you have been in politics long enough to know that sometimes people don't have the free vote. For an example, and it's happening in history, certainly in our lifetime, when both Labour and the Tory party have brought in a prime minister for whom the public have had no say.
Yeah.
How democratic is that?
Well, I mean, it's not. I think you might describe it as suboptimal, but both parties have been in that situation where they've been elected to office, and then the person who heads up the government is either Tony Blair's case stands down voluntarily, or in Boris Johnson's case is removed because he had all the gifting in the world but didn't have the character. And that's an interesting point for us Christians to discuss at some length on another webinar, perhaps. Gifting versus character. It's not ideal, but most people voting at a general election are voting for both the leader of that party and the party itself. So I think you can justify it, particularly if we are continuing to try and deliver on the manifesto on which we stood, in this case, in the 2019 election. Yeah, it's not ideal, but I think we can justify it. I don't know that there's, in the last 12 months, too many people have been crying out for a general election. I think now we've got 12 months and people can see whether they like Rishi Sunak or not. And in the end, the people of our country will make the decision. And I'll tell you what I've learned I think I've stood for Parliament 9 times. I think the British people nearly always get it right. And they are a sophisticated and impressive electorate. And I'm sure they get it right in November 24 when we have the next general election.
But how can they get it right, Sir Gary, when you won't be standing?
What a kind thing to say, but actually my successor, the Conservative Party candidate in South West Devon, has been chosen. She's an absolutely terrific Christian woman, and I think she will be an upgrade for the electors of South West Devon.
But why aren't you standing? What is? I mean, you've spoken earlier about this conviction, this calling, to leave one career, and being led by God into the avenue of public service. Have you had a similar revelation that said, actually, Gary, enough's enough?
Well, that's a very good question. And the honest answer is no, I have not had a similar revelation. But I've been weighing this for over 12 months before I announced I think it was November 2022.
Yep.
The reality is I've been there 31 years, as you say. I will have been there 32 years by state date next election, which is almost certain to be late next year. And I think last Thursday in November, you heard it here first. And I will be 69. My wife is 70 in a month's time. She won't thank me for telling you that over the airwaves. And we have 5 grandchildren locally. I do quite a lot of preaching in local churches. We just want a quieter. So I think, as you approach 70, surely you're entitled to take things a bit easier. So that's the only reason. And I think actually I can see in myself, if I'm honest, I'm not racing around like the young members of Parliament do. I don't like to embrace social media like the younger members of Parliament do. It's a younger person's game now. And I think let them get on with it. And I'll always be around if anyone wants to seek my opinion. But also there is one thing I want to do, and perhaps we'll come back to another later on in the conversation, but I have got a thought about what I would like to do. I'm not retiring from the kingdom of God. I'm just stepping back from pretty exhausting, pretty brutal frontline public service. And I think 32 years I feel that the Lord is not saying you keep going, whatever. I think it is time for me to step back.
Because you have, amongst other things, you have a 200-mile commute to get into Westminster. Yeah.
That's right. And that's, the older you get, just even sitting on the train for 2.5 hours, why is it exhausting? I don't know, but it is. You get to Paddington and you think, you know what, I'm tired. I haven't even got to Westminster yet. I'm exhausted already. And I nearly always sleep well on a Monday night because we tend to vote at 10 o'clock on a Monday. And I think, blind, with the traveling and that, all that business, that's enough for me today. Thank you very much.
Let's then turn to this concept of influences or potential dangers for democracy.
Yeah.
Because you and your colleagues, because MPs are people of influence, so many people try to influence you. It could be a professional lobbying outfit that comes into central lobby, or it could be a local businessman who takes their MP out to a day at the races, hoping to back the right horse. How helpful are those kind of influences to democracy?
I think it's pretty inevitable. Everyone seems to want a slice of you when you get elected. And I think the key thing here, Nigel, is transparency. We do have now pretty strict rules about declaring anything that's remotely equivalent to an inducement, shall we say. I forget the threshold, but it's not much. It's a couple £100 or something like that. You've got to declare it. So I think, provided people know that, oh, he's just had it all paid for. This never happened to me, by the way. Holiday to the Maldives, and then he's come back and started to talk about, the government of Maldives and trading relations. Well, you would quickly spot what was going on there, and that's completely against the rules. So I think, look, it's not about in the United States of America, lobbying there's down to a fine art, and it's quite brutal, and it's everywhere at all times. We're nothing like that here. But of course, people want to speak to us because we're the ones who are making the laws. And of course, more often than not, the lobbying is very, very helpful. So, for example, if I visit a business in my constituency, which I do most Fridays, different businesses, or schools, or charities, or whatever it might be, they're telling me what their experience is on the ground. They're telling me how it is for them, and perhaps saying, would you just please tweak the law a bit so that we can employ more people, or whatever it might be. So it's not all bad, and it's not all for their bottom line. It's often, do you know what, we need to make this work, and if you don't sort out X, Y, and Z, we can't really grow, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think we've got the balance right here. Very strict rules. Transparency is the key.
And one of your criterion for democracy was the concept of a free press.
Yeah.
Now, a free press presents truth to power. It holds the powerful to account. But the media can also make governments, and the media can also break careers.
Yep.
How does Parliament ensure that the media is not only free, but also responsible?
Well, I don't think we can, to be honest. I've grappled with that over the years because I've seen some pretty appalling, press attacks on people. And often, again, anyone watching this program, if you've been involved in an event yourself and then the media get hold of it and they tell you what happened, you think, well, were they at the same event as me? Because that's nothing like what I experienced. But I don't think you can put in place more shackles or more closer framework for responsibility. And having a free press is so important. You ask the people of Russia, or Iran, or North Korea, or China, it's so important. We have to take, I'm afraid, a bit of a downside, which is sometimes some of our media outlets are utterly irresponsible. Now, some more so than others. A newspaper I read, I think that pretty much, I think it's pretty balanced. The Times, oh, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But some of them are just absolutely outrageous. But then again, it's a free country, and people, if that's the sort of the staple diet they want to feed on every day, then that's their free choice. But no, if you don't have a free press, one of the crucial checks and balances is not in place, and therefore we could quickly end up in a country where knock on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning, your daughter and your son-in-law disappear and you never see them again. So I hate the Daily Mail, if I'm honest, but I'm glad it's there.
And over the years, the press and other media outlets have run stories of MP scandals.
Yep.
Usually they're about sex, they're about money, or they're about economy with the truth. How much is an MP's personal behaviour a threat to democracy?
I mean, it's always been this, because as people need to be reminded from time to time, members of Parliament are human beings. And of course, politics attracts people with colourful personalities, with lots of self-confidence, possibly big egos, strong opinions. And so you're going to get, from time to time, you're going to get people misbehaving. Also, I would add the point, I mean, I've been faithfully married to my wife, Janet, for 45 years. And for the last 31 years, 2, 3 or 4 nights a week, she's been in Devon and I've been in London. So you can imagine that for some people, it's tempting, and we work in an environment where there's lots of bars, there's lots of restaurants, there's lots of young people of either the same or the opposite sex. Temptation lurks at every door. So it's a bit of a recipe for disaster, if I'm honest. Perhaps it's a miracle we don't have more instances. So we are human beings, we will make mistakes, but I do think we should, if we're elected to a leadership role, we should try and set an example, of course, imperfectly. And some of the things that have been coming out, in recent times, pretty unpleasant, I think. I would say this, that during my 30 years, members of parliament from all sides of the house, from time to time, 1 or 2 have let the side down. And I think it was ever thus. I mean, go back to 200-300 years ago when the front page of Punch magazine would lampoon politicians and expose those who were, particularly hypocritical or drunk or something. We're human beings, Nigel, therefore we do our best, but sometimes I'm afraid, yes, we'll always let you down.
You are human. In a way, politicians are no different from the rest of us, and yet the public entrusts you to make moral judgments, particularly on those sort of conscience issues like abortion, like gene therapy, like assisted dying, like going to war. Didn't the public have a right to expect some moral standards from you?
Yes, I think they should. And I think for the vast majority of us, we are aware of that and try and live as well and decently and respectfully as we possibly can, whether or not we're men and women of faith. And again, if you think 650 of us here, and I've described that most people have got pretty vibrant personalities, maybe that's not relevant, I'm not sure. The numbers of people who get embroiled in scandal in any 12 months is what, 5, 6, 7? I'm not excusing it. It's a relatively small number. But I completely agree, and I've said this many times and I've made speeches about it. If we are elected to higher office or to office to represent 70,000 people, they should expect us to behave decently. I was going to say at all times, but certainly when they're in the public eye.
Because I sense, and I might, I can be corrected, but I sense that actually it's because of the likes of these stories. Yes, it is the single figure percentage people, but they become high profile when they're splashed on the news. And yes, it is unfair to tar all with the same brush, but nevertheless, doesn't this undermine confidence in politics, not just politicians? Doesn't it also make the public less likely to vote? Because they see some MPs, and again, you're all tarred unfairly, but nevertheless, with the same brush, that they're all just a shambles, and they're all just, a shower. And they don't deserve me going out in the rain to stick my cross with a pencil and a ballot paper in mid-November.
Well, I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, and it is unfortunate when we do let the public down. I guess the worst example in my 30 years, and here am I the one to bring it up, is 2010, the expenses scandal, where the Telegraph got hold of every MP's expenses and brutally and mercilessly over a number of weeks exploited it. And even today, I go into a pub with my wife and stand at the bar and buy, half a lemonade, and she'll have a triple brandy, and someone will quip, "Oh, getting out on expenses," and it was 13 years ago. It really made a very powerful impact, and it was, without excuse. But again, it was certainly less than 20 people who were fingered for doing wrongdoing. It is unfortunate. It does happen. But I'll tell you something, that there's been quite a few surveys which demonstrate that people will say, "Oh, politicians, no, I'm sick to the death of all politicians, But oh, actually, no, our member of parliament, she's very good. I've met her. You know, she works really hard, or whatever it might be. And actually, when they have contact with us and recognise doing our best, you know, accessible, working hard, then it's not so bad. And again, I don't think this has changed over the years. Perhaps now with social media, you know, people are aware of it more immediately. But there's always been political scandals, always will be. But I guess I would ask your viewers tonight to think: if we don't have a democracy, which involves people standing for election, being elected, not being elected, and being removed by us, what system should we have? And you know what I'm going to say now. Churchill's famous dictum that democracy is the worst form of governance in the world, apart from all the others. And if you've got democracy involving human beings being elected, you're always going to have incidents which undermine people's confidence. You know, I will say again, despite the fluff and the fuss and the horror, really, of the last 2 years, and we have made a bit of a hash of it politically, I think our democracy in the United Kingdom is pretty robust, and we have the checks and balances, and there is a solution, and it's called the ballot box. And next year, I think it's quite likely the British people will exercise their right. And good on them.
Indeed, they will. But history tells us that people are becoming less interested in expressing their political view at the ballot box. You know, and my question to you now is: how helpful is it to democracy when you have an electorate that feels disinterested, or powerless, or disenfranchised?
It's not helpful. But I see, in my 30-odd years, I'm not sure that any more than sort of 70% of people have ever voted, and now it went down to, it dipped, I think in 2010, I think. I'm not sure, but it's actually rising again at the moment. So sort of we're back to mid 65, 67%. Well, you're never going to get more than 75%, because I'm afraid, whether we like it or not, there's a minority of people in our country, in any country, who are completely disengaged, not just with democracy or politics or government, but with life, you know, with work. So you're never going to get 100% or anything like 100%. If we can get back up in the next election, I think it'll be a big turnout next election. You know, to around 70%. It's not perfect, but it's an awful lot. It's a lot better than the United States of America, where they got virtually just over 50% of people vote now. So look, it's not good. And we've got to engage with young people and all the rest of it. But I'm not alarmed about it at the moment. And to just say again that most of us are doing our best, and most of us have got respect and support from our constituents. And even if they are disenfranchised, disenchanted with the whole of politics, I hope our own local performance shows them that actually our country does work and democracy does work.
Thank you. Just to the viewers, folks, you've got loads of questions coming in. Thank you so much. I'd like to remind you that we're not going to discuss personality tonight, because whoever you're going to talk about and you want to ask Gary about has not got the right to reply. So if you're asking his opinion about Mr. X or Miss Y, we're not going to include it. But please keep those questions rolling in about the principles that Gary is talking about tonight. So, Gary, let's go to the question for tonight then. How endangered is democracy, particularly British democracy?
Okay, I think we certainly can't take it for granted. Answering your question directly, I don't feel that our democracy is endangered in this country. It's been battered and bruised. But what I would say is the last 2 years, where we've removed 2 prime ministers, you know, it's pretty big stuff. But the reality is we've removed 2 prime ministers. There are systems in place. So whether it's the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and I think, you know, I was one of the first people to put in a letter of objection to Boris Johnson. But whether it's the Parliamentary Party, or whether it's the Standards and Privileges Committee, or whatever it might be, there are checks and balances in place to make sure that people who should not be in office are no longer in office. So I feel that the last 2 years, though it's been a little chaotic, and I know a lot of people have been hurt, I think it's demonstrated that our democracy does work. We have got the checks and balances in place. And again, because of COVID and lockdown, I have a lot to do with politicians in other countries because of my Western Foundation for Democracy days. every country's going through the same thing. You know, people are under pressure, therefore they're blaming the government. One of the things I learned early doors when I was first elected in 1992 was that part of our role is to be a whipping boy or girl or a safety valve. So a gentleman wrote to me, this is well before the internet, emails, social media, and so on. A gentleman wrote to me and he was just having a real rant and everything was wrong. And I wrote back in the same terms, well, how dare you write to me about it? And I think it's fine. And we blah, blah, blah. And he wrote back again, said, oh, dear Mr. Streeter, I'm so sorry you felt you had to write back. If I can't get it off my chest by writing to my MP, you know, how can I get my frustration? Vent my frustrations. That was about the first 3 months of my being elected. I thought, what a lesson for me. I wrote back apologetically. You know, the fact that people vent their frustration with us is part of our democracy. It's part of letting off steam. It's part of, well, we want to blame someone. Oh, we know who to blame. It's those guys up there. And by the way, we'll have a chance next year and we'll show them. And they in 1997, I'll tell you what, they showed us. And again in 2010, democracy. I think it's okay.
Now, we've mentioned the all-party Christians in Parliament group before in our conversation. Now, are you trying to influence politics as a group? And if so, is that particularly democratic?
No, we're not trying to influence politics at all. We don't have any corporate policies whatsoever. It's completely cross-party and multi-denominational, if that's the right phrase. And we exist really to equip and encourage all believers here. And as we all know, people's faiths different. You can be at a different stage of your own faith journey, or you can just be from a particularly conservative, small c theological background, or a very liberal or a charismatic. We cater for all. We just try and encourage. I spend a lot of my time sort of mentoring younger Christian MPs of all parties. And that is all done in great confidence. Lots of Bible studies and so on. We're just trying to build people up, build their faith, and encourage them in their journey. Because all jobs, I think, for Christians in the 21st century are tricky, lots of challenges. But one of the additional pressures for members of Parliament, believe it or not, is that not many have a very positive church experience back in the constituency or back where they live, because understandably in many ways, but it shouldn't happen. The congregation, the constituents will go up to me and others like me during the coffee break or whatever, or even sometimes during the quiet moment in the prayers and say, what about X? What about Y? And you said this, and what are you going to sort out? Do you know what? I've just come here to worship God. I just want to worship, but a lot of colleagues don't go regularly for that. So we have a Tuesday chapel service. We just had it today. We get outside preachers in, great. We sing worship songs. I've forgotten what the question is now. We're not trying to influence policy or anything of that nature. We're just trying to build individuals to keep them going in this tricky old journey called being a Christian in the 21st century in any sector, but including politics.
Now, many Christians look to the Bible for guidance in their everyday life and their jobs. How does the Bible help you decide how to vote?
Yeah, rarely. I think. I mean, obviously, I read the Bible, not all of it. I read a passage every day. I start my day on my knees and with a quiet time, and that's a book I've been reading now for 40 years, and you just never get to the end of it, do you? It's just always another surprise. It's just so deep and it's inspired. It's full of truth. So I suppose, broadly speaking, it gives you a Christian worldview, Nigel, and I think that's so important. That's the sort of the backdrop on which you see life. And therefore make decisions. But if we're got a vote today on, discharging sewage into rivers, or what VAT there should be on bicycles, it's not likely you're going to find that possibly in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, actually Deuteronomy I love, but Leviticus and Numbers, I don't spend too much time that I have to confess to my shame. You're not going to find specific answers. Broadly, it's a stewardship, look after our planet, all the rest of it, but you're not going to find it's the principles we extract from Bible truth, which is loving God, respect His creation, love your neighbor, care for the most vulnerable in your society. These are the things which shape us. And I will say this: for most of my time up here, I've been involved in a cross-party prayer group, which we called G6, 2 Labour, 2 Conservative MPs, 1 Lib Dem, 1 DUP. Some of them now lost their seats, but we still meet once a term for a dinner, which we pay for ourselves, just in case your viewers are wondering. We have learned so much from each other about how we want to make our country better, but we have different ways of going about it. And we've learned that just because my friend from the Labour Party is wanting to do something in a different way, that doesn't make me right and him wrong, or him right and me wrong. It's just a different way to get to the same end, which is to improve our country and to strengthen people and so on. So, yeah, it's all a journey. The Bible is everything, really, isn't it? It's the underpinning of our Christian worldview, and principles flow from it which help shape and guide us. But you don't flick through and put your finger in Psalm 32 to find an answer to what you're voting on today.
Now, we've had lots of questions, as you might imagine, from viewers tonight. So I'm going to turn to them now. Okay, they all come to me anonymously, so I can't tell you anything about the questioner. But here's one. Has there ever been a time when you've been conflicted when asked to vote, when you have your Christian principles and your on the one hand, and your party whips demand that you vote contrary to those?
Yeah. Yes, there have been situations like that. I mean, although I don't like to talk about sort of Christian issues, because I think everything is a Christian issue. I think God's interested in the whole of life, but the kind of the narrow band of Christian issues that people tend to roll out are nearly always free votes anyway. That isn't such a problem. But when I was first elected, and it was all a bit of a shock and all happened in a bit of a rush, my wife and I agreed that we would vote in this way, sort of conscience first, i.e. God, constituency second, party third. We've tried to stick to that. I think I voted against my party 9 times in 31 years. I don't know if that's good or not. But there have been times when, for example, back in the 1990s, we cut the education budget, and I was very upset about it. And I was a PPS, which is like a junior ministerial rank bag carrier, really. And I wrote my letter of resignation, and John Major got us all together that night and said, something's going down in Northern Ireland tomorrow. Can't tell you what it is, but it's going to be a really difficult day. So, I want us all just to kind of be, play the team game and be together. He had no idea I was about to resign. And as a result of that meeting, and it was a big thing in Northern Ireland the next day, bad thing, I tore up my resignation letter on the way out of the room and stuck it in the bin. Now, I don't know if that's the right thing or not. Education cuts went ahead. Excuse me. But sometimes, you have to make decisions, don't you? But I tell you what, it's not just for people in politics, difficult decisions. Who want to be a Christian teacher in 2023, or, retailer? Or it's just challenging, isn't it? And we've got to think it all through for ourselves, with people beside us, praying, helping, bouncing ideas off each other, and doing the best we can. And, we'll make mistakes. Of course we will, sometimes.
Thank you. Here's another question then. Do you think the left wing or the right wing is the more natural choice for Christians in politics?
Yeah, good question. And I do a lot of guiding of younger people who feel, called into politics. And I always say this: you should join the political party that most aligns with your outlook on life. There is a difference between, I like to call it centre right and centre left rather than right wing, left wing. I think of right wing, and I think of some of the headbangers in my party who, I don't have so much in common with. But centre right thinking and centre left thinking, that there is a divide. And the key thing is work out where you fit best. When I first got involved, and I told you, it's sort of back of a shoestring, didn't really know what I was doing. I joined the SDP, which is now part of the Liberal Democrats. But as I started thinking about it, to my shame, only from the age of 30, well, what do I actually think about the royal family and our role in Europe and the armed forces and individual responsibility and the role of enterprise and wealth creation, all these things? Something like, well, blow me down, I'm a natural conservative. That's just who I am. And so after 18 months, 2.5 years, I think, in the SDP, and elected as an SDP councillor, I crossed the floor, Plymouth City Council. Wow. It was tough, it was brutal, it upset a lot of people, and joined the Conservative Party because that's where I fitted. And if I thought about it beforehand, that's where I would have joined. So join the party which most naturally aligns with your outlook on life. There's no such thing as a perfect party. If there is and you join it, you'll ruin it. And just get involved, and you won't agree with everything, but actually you can't really make an impact in politics unless you do join one of the major political parties.
Now, when people see politicians at work, that's typically we see extracts from Prime Minister's Question Time on the national news. It often comes across that life in the chamber is very adversarial, almost bear baiting, and potentially it looks quite. It varies between looking farcical and very nasty, pantomime and quite cutting. Yeah. But you spoke earlier about how you meet with a group of fellow Christian friends who are members of all parties. Can you just tell us a bit about how people actually do have friendships, whether they're Christians or not, from different sides of the floor in the House of Commons? Because actually it doesn't, some people be surprised at that, but actually the person you're arguing against is one of your best mates.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Prime Minister's Question Time, really, it's a shame that that's broadly what people see, because it's just theatre. I think it is useful in that it tests the mettle of the Prime Minister of the day, but that's as far as you can take it, really. It's just theatre, and it's not like that almost any other time. And so, for example, I chaired a committee. I do a lot of chairing of committees this afternoon, which is looking at our emissions trading scheme, not something that many perhaps of us know much about. And it was very much all sides were trying to improve the legislation, contributions from around the committee, and there was no, I was going to say little, but there was no sort of Punch and Judy politics at all. But people don't see that. And the select committees, again, cross-party, and largely speaking, just people trying to tease out the truth and make sensible decisions and produce useful reports. There are friendships across the divide with all parties. And one of the ways that actually those friendships are forged is when you go on an international trip, like an important parliamentary fact-finding trip to the Bahamas or something like that. You might be, that was a joke, Nigel, you're allowed to grin at that stage because we don't normally do things like that. But you're allowed to, these are actually quite important to go and look at what other countries are doing and whether they've got better ideas than we have. But you tend to form really good relationships with those people when you go on those trips, and you keep them when you come back. So you, in the corridors, you'll stop and have a chat with that person, or you might have a coffee with them and so on. So lots of, even amongst non-Christians, lots of friendships, but particularly amongst the Christians, lots of cross-party friendships. We encourage it. We encourage it in Christians in Parliament, because somehow there is power when you reach out across the divide and make a friendship or form an alliance. There's a real power, I think, released in that situation. So we do encourage people to get into small groups of friendships, hopefully cross-party.
Yeah. Now, you said earlier that your all-party parliamentary group doesn't have any of its distinct policies because it's cross-party by definition. But is there a way in which you would like Christianity to inform Parliament and to inform legislation?
Well, I think it does inform Parliament and does inform legislation through the speeches and the contributions that Christians here make on all sides of the chamber. So I think that is the best way. I mean, I think it's, some people say, oh, shouldn't we have a Christian party? Well, we've had a Christian party from time to time. It doesn't ever get anywhere. But, there is no Christian policy on how to, how the best way of raising tax or when to fight a war or anything like that. So I think though our system is adversarial, it's as good a system of democracy as anywhere that I've ever been in the world. I mean, sometimes people say, Scandinavian systems. Yes, okay, they're very different and they're also pretty good. But are they materially superior to I don't think they are. Our system, our court system is adversarial. The prosecutor says X and the defense tries to say Y and so on. That's just how we do it over here. And I think that's fine. We're not adversarial behind the scenes. We are, as I've explained, friends. When we make bad law is when there's no opposition to it. So Dangerous Dogs Act is often wheeled out as an example, but I've seen others during my time here. you know, all parties agree, or let's get it through quickly. And you find out 2 months down the line, you've done something really stupid. It's great that things are being probed, explored, challenged, and that way, and often you see the ministers will. So Labour will come forward. Oh, sorry, the opposition party will come forward and say, "Oh no, don't do A, do B," and government says, "No, we're going to do A." And then they go away and think about it, and you find that the report says it comes back and, "Oh, well, we are doing B after all." Well, we didn't. Nobody lost faith, but we got to the right result in the end. And that happens. I've seen that happen over the 3 decades very frequently.
Yeah. The next question then from one of our viewers tonight: would Jesus consider democracy as the best way to manage the delivery of his commandments, to love God and to love one's neighbour?
No, I don't think he would. I think that message was for us as individuals and coming together as churches. But he was interested in, how we set up society, I think, and ensuring that it was a space of law and order and peace and people acting responsibly and so on. But I don't, people sometimes say Jesus was a Democrat or, would have joined the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. I just think our gospel is so much above any political creed or party or manifesto. We're talking about the Son of God here. We're talking about the person who created the universe. I think he's well above politics and democracy. I think, he wants us to create societies in which the people that he loves, which is everyone, are looked after and the vulnerable are well treated and so on. And as going back to Churchill, and we've discovered over 5,000-6,000 years of broadly of civilization that democracy is the least worst of all those. But just going back to one of your earlier questions, democracy is also relatively recent, maybe 200 or 300 years. I mean, let's face it, any people watching this tonight who are female 100 years ago couldn't have voted. Only 100 years ago, for goodness sake, almost living memory. So it's relatively recent, and there's no guarantee that it's going to endure forever. So I think my message to everyone, when I go and speak to sixth formers in the schools I visit every year or twice a year in constituency, is don't care who you vote for, young people, 17, 18-year-olds, but please vote. Don't take it for granted. Democracy needs to be protected, and you can do that by voting.
You raised the subject of young people, so does one of our viewers tonight. Here's the question: how do you encourage a young person to consider entering politics, either local politics or parliament?
Well, I mean, here's some good news. And again, over my 30 years, and I'm sorry I sound like my granddad when I start the sentence by saying, "Oh, during my lifetime." But there always seems to be a small minority in any class I've spoken with, or any sixth form I've spoken to, or any sort of campaigns I've been involved in, or notice on the other side of the street, the Labour Party or Liberal Democrats, there always seem to be a number of young people who love politics. And I remember famously William Hague at the age of 14 used to read Hansard under his bed, his blankets with a torch. I'm not saying they're all quite that crazy, but I mean, I've seen 2 people today who are young men, one man, one woman, both in their 20s, who they're both Christians, who feel that God is calling them into politics, and they've come to me for advice and guidance, and that's brilliant, and it's a privilege to do that. There is a steady stream of young people who want to get involved, and I think that's really deeply reassuring. And not all of them will make it, of course, but it's reassuring. And of course, most people don't want to get involved, and nor should they. It's going to be a minority sport. And after all, we are elected to make decisions that the vast majority of my constituents trust us to make, and they don't want to get involved themselves. They just want to get on and lead their lives, and good on them for that.
In the course of our discussion, conversation, we've mentioned a few. You've mentioned a few landmark things within our country's history in recent years. You mentioned COVID. I'll mention Brexit. Together, we can agree that we've come through some very challenging times. Our viewer asks, do you have hope for our country? And does that hope come from your Christian faith?
Well, thank you. That is a cracking question. And the answer, I mean, I was born, Nigel, as you may know, as an optimist. I've always been sunny side up, drives my wife crazy, but never mind. I am an optimist, but I certainly have hope for our country. And I'll tell you what, and actually my Christian faith gives me both hope and pessimism, because if we really have a Christian worldview, we know two things. One is that we're never going to solve every problem. It's never going to be perfect until Jesus comes again. It won't be perfect. We can't, no matter how much we invest, how much we improve our leadership or our democratic institutions, we won't solve all of these problems, because it's all about sin and human nature. But on the optimistic side of that, we have a redemptive savior. We can redeem, we can claim back, we can improve, we can inspire. And that's what I try and encourage young Christians, MPs here. We're here to make a difference. We are here to reclaim lost territory, really. But I am hopeful, because I see in our young people, when I go to the sixth forms in our schools, and some of your viewers, I think, oh, young people, they're so noisy and I'm on their phones all the time. I just see these great, confident, envisioned, enthusiastic, energetic young people who want to get out there, make a difference. I think they're great. So I am optimistic about the future of our country. We're going to go through a challenging set of circumstances globally. I think there's no doubt about that. I've said for some years, obviously, that a conflict with China is brewing. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's going to happen probably in the next 10 or 20 years. It's going to be unpleasant. But I am optimistic that our country will continue to go from strength to strength. Yeah, I am.
Thank you. We've got time for a few more. Next viewer asks, says, thank you for what you've said about politicians being human and fallible, and asks if you wouldn't mind telling us how you have protected your own integrity as a politician and a husband.
Well, thank you very much. I've been, since back to 1985, when we sort of felt called into politics, we've been so blessed to have good friends, Christian friends around us, praying with us, praying for us, trying desperately to understand politics, which, let's face it, unless you're in it, it's not easy. I have been very blessed. If you say to me, Gary, what's your greatest achievement? I would say my marriage. I can't really explain it, but I just love my wife so much, and it's Wednesday tomorrow. All I'll be thinking about is getting back on that train sometime Wednesday or Thursday to get home again. So we've had a blessed marriage. We've had good people around us praying, and as I mentioned earlier, wonderful friends here at Westminster, all parties, people that you can trust with any confidence, going through something, tricky situation. Let's face it, we all make mistakes. I've made plenty. I could write a book. Maybe I will. Don't do it my way, says Shrita. Yeah, but just people that you trust and can pick you up and challenge you and say, Gary, yeah, you were stupid, but I love you. Let's keep going.
And so you mentioned there about the greatest thing you've achieved would be your marriage. That leads us on to the next question, where the viewer is thinking about your public service. In such a long public service, what has been your most rewarding experience?
I mean, the thing that's my greatest achievement politically, and this is bizarre, is that it happened in 1993, in my first year, when, this is a bit parochial, forgive me, but we campaigned for the Trident refit work, Trident being the submarine that supports the nuclear defense system, to be carried out in Devonport, which is a massive naval base and dock in, not actually in the constituency, but in Plymouth, where it was destined for Rosyth, and the hole in the ground for this great big new dry dock had already been dug. But we campaigned like mad because we felt Devonport had a better case. And so in 1993, after 6 months of pretty solid campaign with the fellow MP for Plymouth Devonport, David Jameson, we just went at it hammer and tong, and the government finally agreed it should go to Devonport, and that's been worth millions and millions of pounds a year and thousands of jobs. And so, that was a good thing. It is ironic that a committed Christian should lobby like mad to have work being done and the submarine in his constituency or in his backyard, which carries out weapons of mass destruction. Perhaps that's ironic, but actually it was about the economic benefit. But actually, the reality is, the thing that gives me more satisfaction than anything else is to walk down Ridgeway in Plimpton or Plymstock, anywhere in my constituency, and someone will stop me and say, "Oh, Gary, I just want to say thank you. You helped my cousin 6 years ago," or "You helped me. You've probably forgotten. You gave me some advice 12 years ago about, and it worked out well." And or you helped, and it's just to have helped people. I couldn't help everyone. Tried to help people all those years, and the echoes are coming back, Nigel. And it's wonderful actually, and it's very humbling, but it's very wonderful that people have expressed gratitude. It helps to have been a lawyer background to try and help people cut through the problems and get something solved for them. But that's helping individuals has been definitely the thing I'll take away from my 30-odd years, plus obeying God, obeying the call.
Gary, thank you for joining us. It's been lovely to hear you and see you again.
Thank you.
My guest today has been Sir Gary Streeter MP. At the same time next week, I will be discussing the moral implications of war with the former head of the British Army, General the Lord Richard Dannatt. I hope you'll be able to join us, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.